What's up, Mecha fans, and welcome back to the channel. So once again, we are diving into Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion. We're doing another tier list, and this time it is going to be on every single nightmare frame that appears in the series. Before we dive into it though, I want to hear from you guys, so head on down to the comment section below and let me know your favourite nightmare frames within this series. And while you're there, please do leave a like on this video, subscribe if you're a fan of Mecha anime content. I want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. You guys know the drill by now. We've got S, A, B, C, D, and F tier. I have actually included F here because I think there are some pretty very mediocre looking mecha within this series. And one thing I do want to point out is that this is just for Lelouch of the Rebellion. I'm not including nightmare frames from Akito the Exiled or Lelouch of the Resurrection. This is just specifically from the original series of both seasons. Kicking things off though, we have the Akatsuki. Now this is the Black Knight's kind of standard nightmare frame in season 2. I think it's pretty solid. I think it works as just a standard grunt frame. There's nothing overly incredible about it. There's nothing bad about it either. It is just the most solid looking nightmare frame in my opinion. That's not too cluttered or anything like that. It's just a decent design, so we're going to sit it nicely in B. And then moving on, we do have the Akatsuki command model. It's like the Akatsuki, but in my opinion, it just looks a little bit better. You kind of have more spiky elements to it. So it's specifically with the head and the shoulders. And of course, this one is more of a dark purple color scheme, which I personally prefer. Whilst it's not an A tier one, it is definitely going at the top of B. Next up, we've got the Burai. This is another grunt suit, first operated by the Japanese Liberation Front, and then it's kind of implemented into the Black Knights as well. It's a solid looking grunt suit. I think I like the Akatsuki just a little bit more. This is more of the traditional grunt suit of Code Geass, the kind of more iconic look of them, whereas I guess the Akatsuki's not quite as iconic when it comes to what you would associate with Code Geass when it comes to nightmare frames. But I think the Burai looks solid, works as a military grunt suit. I think I am going to sit it at the back of B, and then moving on from that, we do have the Burai Kai, which is kind of a little bit more of an upgraded version, probably one that's meant for some of the more higher ups. I think generally there's not a whole lot of design difference. It's got these weird antennae that kind of come down its back. I think that's a kind of cool detail. But other than that, it's literally the same suit. So we're going to sit it just above it. These might end up moving down, but we'll see. And then we move on to the Galahad, which is commanded by one of the Knights of Round. I can't remember exactly who it was, but this is a badass looking suit. I gotta be honest, the proportions, they don't 100% work for me, but one thing I do love about it is that it's really over-designed, but in a way that is also still very simplistic. You've got this giant sword that's on its back, which very heavily reminds me, and it's probably taken a lot of inspiration actually, from Mihawk from One Piece. Of course, he's got that giant sword, sits on his back. This is sat on there in exactly the same way. There's got to be at least some inspiration there, considering when Code Geass came out in comparison to One Piece. But anyway, I think this is a really solid looking suit. Don't know whether I'd go quite A tier, but I'm going to go right at the top of B for now. Again, it might end up moving into A, and B's looking for his stats at the moment, but don't worry, there will be other things going in other places. Next up, we've got the Ganymede. This is a non-combat type nightmare frame. The only notable thing it does is make a giant pizza. So I've got to be honest, I'm going to sit this one in D. Next up though, we got the Gareth. I think it looks like a pretty solid suit. Going to go in B for this one again. I think I'm going to put it behind these two though, just because these are kind of more well-rounded, more utilized in this series, but also just more solid suits, if you will. This one, I mean, it's cool, but I don't love it. Next up though, moving on to one that I do love, and that is the Gawain, which is very iconic within Code Geass. There's 3 suits and 3 nightmare frames in this series that are almost the representation of it when you think of especially if you've seen the series, when you think of the 3 most notable ones, this is one of them. But yeah, the Gawain, piloted by Lelouch and Cece, stolen. It's really cool though. It's got a very Egyptian look to it. It's kind of going for that Sphinx kind of look. Not the Sphinx, that's the sitting thing. Nubis, that's it. So we're going to sit it right in A tier. It is one of my favorites. Of course, like I said, it's one of the most iconic as well. Then we'll move on to the Gecko. I'm tempted to say that it's an upgraded version, or kind of the next step developed from the Akatsuki. Looks very similar, and I think it looks better. I'm going to, again, sit this one in B. I'm going to sit this in between the two. I think I like this one just a bit better because of the colour scheme. And then we move on to the Glasgow. Once again, another grunt suit, which I got to say, this is the kind of original grunt suit, I think, at least in this series. It's solid. It's all round, it's like an all-rounder, if you will. Of course, it goes for that militaristic look. and it accomplishes that very well in my opinion. Definitely like it more than the Burai and Burai Kai. So I think I'm going to go in B with it. I'm going to set him right here. I'm actually going to move these two down to C because B's getting a little bit too stacked, I gotta be honest, but this kind of more well rounds it out. And then we move on to the Gloucester, which again is another grunt suit, but this one is for the Britannians. I want to say I like it more than the Glasgow, but I'm not sure whether I do. I'm going to sit it in B, but I think I'm going to sit it right behind it. And then we move on to another Gloucester, but this one is actually Cornelius. Now I'm not going to talk too much about like specific custom paint jobs. In fact, I've not really included any like custom paint jobs unless there's like significant differences in it and it's well utilized within the series. And I think Cornelius Gloucester, it's got more additions to it to warrant actually giving it its own place on this list, if you will. And I like this one more than the Gloucester, of course. I kind of really dig the kind of horns it's got coming out the side. Of course, it does have a cape as well. Like the colour scheme more. I think I'm actually going to sit it above this one. I do really quite like Cornelius Gloucester. I'm really tempted to actually move it even higher. Just because, of course, it's well utilised in the series, but I think it's just adding like the cape and that. It just makes the design more like well-rounded, if you will. And I think I'm going to put it here. I still think I like these two designs just a little bit more, but yeah, I'm going to put it solidly in the middle of B. And then we move on to the Gunru, which I think is like a grunt suit for the Chinese Federation, and it's not really like a nightmare frame in the same way. It's just this like weird cockpit on wheels. I'm not the biggest fan of this one. Again, I think I'm going to sit it down in D. And then we move on to a very, very iconic one. Like I said, talking about like the three most iconic from Code Geass. This is the second one of those, and that is the Guren Mark II, of course, piloted by Callan. Great suit, really, really great power, and I just dig this. It reminds me a lot of Gurren Lagann in some ways, even though I think Gurren Lagann came out after Code Geass. And like I said, it's like one of the most iconic suits, and one of the most iconic nightmare frames, should I say, within Code Geass. So of course, we're sitting it in A. I think I'm actually going to put it in front of the Gawain as well, just because I love the power with the hand and melting nightmare frames. It's got like a certain level of grotesqueness and violence and gruesomeness, which I really, really do dig. And then we move on to the Guren Satan 8 elements. Now I haven't included like the flight unit version because this is kind of that, but just slightly more upgraded, so I didn't really bother including the flight unit version. It seemed a bit pointless. But anyway, this is the Guren Satan 8 elements. Sometimes adding too much onto a suit kind of ruins it a bit. Now, I don't hate this suit by any means, but I just like it, I gotta say, significantly less than the Guren Mark II, just because there's far too much added to it unnecessarily. And I get, you gotta upgrade suits, of course, like I get for power reasons and such, you gotta upgrade your equipment, that makes sense. But from a visual standpoint of me looking at this suit and thinking, is this a great design? Is this something that I want a figure of? Don't get me wrong, if they brought a figure out of this, I would probably buy it. But I still just like the more simplistic approach of the Guren Mark II. And sometimes adding too much on things can ruin it just a little bit. So I still would put it in B. I think I'm going to put it just under this one that we've got here, which was the Galahad. Yeah, I think I like the Galahad just a little bit more. But like I said, it's still like top of B. So it's still a good suit. But I just think that it's not quite as good as what the Guren Mark II is. Next up, we've got the Night Police, which I want to say is a repurposed version of the Siegfried, which we'll talk about soon. I surprisingly really like this one. It's looking like very chunky and bulky, but it also works because every part of it is like that. So you don't have kind of arms that are too skinny in comparison to the rest of the suit. It's all round just well-rounded. So I actually really like the Night Police. I really like the colour scheme of it. I think I'm going to put it somewhere in B, and I think I'm going to put it over the Guren Satan 8 elements. And then next we'll move on to the Lancelot. I was talking about those three most iconic suits from Code Geass. We've got the Gawain, we've got the Guren Mark II, and then we have the Lancelot, which in my opinion is the best nightmare frame in Code Geass. We're putting it right at the top of S tier. It's one of the first that appears in the series. It stays throughout, even though we get upgraded versions, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the Lancelot, not only is the colour scheme great, I love a white and gold colour scheme. We don't get them too often, and when we do, they always nail it. But the Lancelot is just so well designed. It's so sleek and nice and simple and straightforward. It's not too over designed. It works for the kind of suit that it's trying to be and the kind of action sequences that it's going into. It's just a suit that's an all-arounder and works in every way. There's nothing about this suit, there's nothing about this nightmare frame, that I don't like. Even when I look at like the Gawain, the Guren, as much as I love both those suits, there's maybe things that I would change about them or that I don't like quite as much as other things. When it comes to the Lancelot though, every part of it I think it's great. There's nothing about it that I change. I truly love it, and it is probably my favourite suit within this series. And then we move on to the Lancelot Albion, which is kind of the late season 1 upgraded version of it, where it's essentially the Lancelot but with wings, and it looks really cool. But I also don't think the Lancelot needs wings. I still love it, and I'm still going to put it at the top of A. It's not too over-designed either, it's just adding on these wings, and it doesn't make it too bulky, but at the same time, I love the Lancelot as kind of a grounded vehicle that's, you know, really quick and kind of able to infiltrate and such. I love the Lancelot when it works like that, and it still works when it has wings, because it kind of works for like aerial missions, but also fast-paced aerial missions. So I still really like it. It's at the top of A, of course, it's a great suit, but I just prefer it without the wings. And then we move on to the Lancelot Conquista, which is the Season 2 version of the Lancelot. This just has too much on it. You add on this whole like float system or float unit, whatever it's called, just makes it unnecessarily big. And I don't like it that way. So unfortunately, I'm not going to sit this one in A. It's actually going to go in B. I still like the main Lancelot. It's just these additions, I simply think that it just adds way too much to it. Now, the Guren 8 elements, the reason I've got it higher is because the Guren as a suit is already a little bit chunkier anyway. So adding these extra elements to it doesn't overdo it quite as much as what it does with the Lancelot. And then we move on to the Lancelot Frontier, which is actually piloted by CC. Now, I think this has a similar kind of things to the Conquista. I don't think it has quite as much on it. And of course, it does have a different color scheme. It's pink and gold as opposed to white and gold. I think it looks solid. It's kind of utilized within like the last few episodes when Lelouch becomes Emperor, and that's when CC's piloting it. I like it. I think I like it just a little bit more than the Conquista because there's not as much big things on it, but I also don't like the colour scheme quite as much. So we're sitting it nicely, like towards the top of B. It's still a great looking suit. The Lancelot can never look truly bad. Next up, we've got the Mordred, which is piloted by Anna. I wasn't a big fan looking at this one initially, but the more I look at it, the more it grows on me. I love the head design where it's got, I don't know, like this weird headdress kind of thing that kind of comes out at the side. I love, like, the head design's great. I love the colour scheme, that kind of magenta with a golden yellow, with white, with a little bit of like a black grey in there as well. I'm never the biggest fan of super bulky suits, and that's kind of what this one is. But also I think it's the perhaps best version of that kind of bulk that you could have. I think I'm going to go in B with this one, just below the Gecko though. Then we'll move on to the MR1, which again is another non-combat unit. It's going to go in D. There's nothing overly notable to talk about, aside from the fact that it gets really compact. And then we'll move on to the Percival, which, who's this actually piloted by? I have totally forgotten. It's a cool looking suit. I think it's one of the knights. It looks like that kind of suit anyway. I like the colour scheme on this one. I like the really big horn thing that it's got as well. I think it's solid. I'm kind of comparing it to some of the ones we've got in B because I think it's going to sit there. I got to be honest, I think I'm going to put it pretty high at the top of B, but just behind this, if we can sit it in, there we go. So it's going to sit nicely towards the top of B. And then we'll move on to the Portman. So there's actually the Portman and the Portman Type 2, and I guess I want to talk about them together. I don't really like these suits. I'm going to put this one at the bottom of D. The Portman Type 2 is somehow even worse. Doesn't work. That's going to be our F2 for today, I think. Next up, though, we'll move on to the Ryko. This was used early on. It's not really a nightmare frame, but it's a setup of multiple nightmare frames kind of controlling this big cannon, and they use it when they capture all the students that are going on the trip and such, very early on in the series. And it's utilized then, and it's kind of utilized to hold back all the Britannian forces. It's cool as an idea, and I guess the execution of it's decent. It's not really a nightmare frame. I don't really know why I included it on this list, but technically it is sort of a nightmare frame. But other than that, it's not the most amazing thing ever. I think I'm going to put it in C. I'll put it right at the bottom of C though. Then we move on to the Shen Hu, which is piloted by Li Jing-Kei. The more I look at it, the more I like it. It's a solid design, proportions are all great on it. It definitely takes a lot of inspiration from China, which makes sense, part of the Chinese Federation, their nightmare frames. I love the colour scheme. The mask looks great. It just kind of does everything for me. I think it really does work. This is actually where I'm going to put it in A. I think I'm going to put it just behind the Gawain though. I think I like the Gawain just a little bit more. But the Shen Hu, really, really fantastic looking suit. And then we'll move on to the Shinkiro, which is Lelouch as nightmare frame in the second season. This is one where I'm actually tempted to put this in S tier as well. Very much looks like the Lancelot in some ways. Takes a bit of inspiration from that. But instead of white and gold, it's black and gold. And my God, does that colour scheme look sleek? It is a great design, well proportioned, and it looks badass. I think I'm going to put this one in S. Still like the Lancelot more, but we're going to put it just behind the Lancelot in S tier. And then we move on to the Siegfried. This is piloted by Jeremiah Gottwald, and it's, again, it's not really a nightmare frame as such. It's more of a nightmare armor, I guess you could say, that he pilots. And this is essentially like a big ball with spikes that flies around. Looks a little bit like when Samus Aran from Metroid turns into her little ball. It's got pretty much the same color scheme as her armor. The action sequence with it is awesome. It's so like quickly paced, the way it moves around, and seems like a really deadly piece of weaponry. So I'm going to put this one somewhere in B. I think in terms of design, it's not my favorite, but in terms of what it does, it is awesome. So I'm actually going to put it here. And then we move on to the Siegfried. Now, I think this might actually be my favorite of the more traditional grunt suits. I'd probably say it's the most iconic grunt suit from Code Geass. So I'm going to sit it actually kind of high. I think I like it more than the Night Police version, so we'll put it there. I'm going to move it up again. So yeah, we're going to put it like pretty high in B, just about there. And then we'll move on to the Sutherland Sieg, which is kind of a combination of the Siegfried and the Sutherland as well, and it's piloted by Jeremiah in Season 2. I think I still like the original version of the Siegfried more than this, but this is pretty solid. I think I'm just going to put it right here. I like it more than... No, I'll put it behind the... What am I doing? All Lancelot versions will always go above something like this. Then we'll move on to the Tristan. Now this is piloted by Gino. I'm not the biggest fan of the proportions. Kind of reminds me of like a Macross suit in a way, where it's kind of got these really big shoulders and then the arms kind of come down like that. I really love the head design. I think the head design's cool. Like giant horn things coming out. It reminds me of Pluto, the anime / manga series. I think it's going to go in B, but I don't think it's going to go as high as some of like the other ones that I've put in. I'm going to sit it about here because it's not too over designed like the Lancelot Conquistor is. We may move things around though. And then we move on to the Tristan Divider, which again, much like most of the upgraded versions, it just adds on a bunch of unnecessary shit, and I just don't quite like it as much as the standard version. So we're going to sit it behind. We're going to sit it about there. It's still a decent looking suit, and I like the color scheme and that, but yeah, I just like the standard Tristan just more. It just looks nicer. Now we'll move on to our last few. First up, we got the Vincent. I want to say it's piloted by Rolo. I freaking love this design. Like, I'm looking at it right now. It's just, again, a consistent design. It's well proportioned. Awesome color scheme with like going full on that kind of golden yellow color as opposed to that being the accent color. That's the primary color here. That metallic red looks great. I love the V-fin it's got, which we don't really see. I'm looking at all the suits. There's not really a whole lot of them that have like that more traditional Gundam V-fin, which this one has, and I kind of love this for having that. I'm actually going to go above the Shenhu. I'm going to go in A. There are some great designs in Code Geass, and I'm only just appreciating them fully now. Next we'll move on to the Vincent commander model, should I say. It just adds on a lot more, but I don't think it looks too over designed. I don't think it looks like it's got too much on it. I think it's solid, and I like the color scheme of it. It's a different color scheme, and I don't like it quite as much as the standard Vincent, but it's still a really good colour scheme. So I think this one's going to sit in B, so it's not quite going to sit in A with the other one, but I gotta be honest, I'm putting this one right at the top of B. Damn solid suit. Then we move on to the Vincent Ward, which again I think is like even more upgraded version of the standard Vincent, or even a more upgraded version of the Vincent Commander model. More of a basic colour scheme, and I don't think I quite like it as much as some of the others, but it's still really good. So we're going to sit it about there in B tier. I think the Siegfried is just a bit more iconic. And then last but certainly not least, we have the Zangetsu, which is piloted by Todo within Season 2, I think. Very similar to what we have with the Akatsuki command model. It's almost just the more upgraded version of that. And these like weird like two red ponytail things it's got. Really cool addition. It's a nicely proportioned suit as well. In case you guys couldn't tell, proportions are very important to me when it comes to a suit, and Code Geass is not always the best at doing proportions, but there are also a lot that do it really well. The Zangetsu, where are we going to put it? I think it's going to go in B. I don't think it quite reaches A, but it's going at the top of B. It's a great looking suit. That's where it's going. We're going to have to sort some stuff out here though, because B is far too stacked. We've got to move some things down to C. So immediately, first thought is these can all both go down to C. I got to be honest, I can't really move anything else down. Everything else, it's staying where it is. There we have it. That is my Nightmare Frame tier list for Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion. That is it in all its glory. Of course, we do have the Lancelot right at the top of S tier. Right underneath that, we do have the Shinkiru, and then so on and so forth. You guys can see all of these up here. And then in F tier, we do have the Portman Type 2, the only one appearing in there. Horrible colour scheme, which really brings it down. But there we have it. That is my Nightmare Frame tier list for Code Geass, Lelouch of the Rebellion. Before I get out of here, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe If you are a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future, got a review of Code Geass Akito the XL coming up pretty soon on the channel, along with tier list rankings and such for that as well. Rose the Recapture is also currently airing. Episode 7 just aired pretty recently, and that's going to finish at the start of September, so once that's over, I'm going to do a review of it, and then we'll talk about some more things within rankings as well. Thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today. I'll see you guys next time.